Thank you very much for this chance to come here and give my presentation, share my work with you all. Glad that you all are here to listen to my presentation. And today I'll be talking about local perspectives on global climate change phenomenon in Northern Mountainous Thailand. So my talk will include these topics. I thought that the crowd may be from different backgrounds, so I would like to give some background information before jumping into the main topic of today's presentation, which I believe will help you to understand my presentation and conceptualize what I'm going to talk about and why I'm doing this work and what is it all. All of us here are quite familiar with climate change, but however, I would like to begin with some known facts and figures about climate change. Sorry. So the recent report of IPCC confirms that the temperature trend is going up, the temperature is increasing, but however, it doesn't show any significant trends for precipitation, but shows the quite huge variation in yearly precipitation throughout the globe. I would like to further narrow down to regional scale how the climate change is happening. So when we see in the Southeast Asian region, it also shows the temperature is slowly increasing. The research by Tangang et al., it shows that it is increasing at the rate of 0.14 to 0.2 degrees centigrade per decade since this 1960s. And similarly, for precipitation, as in global context, it also doesn't show much increasing trend. However, it also shows a great variation. Some earlier researches shows that annual total wet day rainfall is increasing by 22 millimeter per decade, and rainfall from extreme rain days is increasing by 10 millimeter per decade, which indicates that it is changing. Sorry. I would like to further stream down to the country scale, that is in Thai, which I'm focusing in this presentation. And the data from Thailand also shows that it has sharp increase in temperature. However, similarly for the rainfall, it doesn't show significant trends in rainfall for the long year data, but it also has a great variation in yearly precipitation pattern. So I would like to further get down to the small provincial scale. It shows impressive result. It shows that there is a variation in precipitation within the country. Like in the mountainous area, it shows the precipitation is decreasing, while in other areas it is quite increasing. So sometimes what we do mistake is like we sometimes check global climate change models, which is covering the very huge scale and may not address the small scale variations properly. And therefore, it is very important to study at the very local scale and narrow down your studies sometimes to the very local scale. So this makes it quite clear that sometimes we have to focus our studies in local scale. So the next important point is how climate change is affecting us. We have learned so much about and heard so much about climate change. So climate change have induced a lot of water-related disaster events. And this graph shows that the flood, drought, wave, windstorm, and landslides and all water-related disasters have been increasing from when we see from 1980s till 2006. So here, when we narrow down to the regional scale, Asia shows like higher number of flood disasters from 1980 to 2006. And for the landslide-related disasters, Asia shows the highest record than other regions, while for the drought, it is high for African region than in Asian region. So let's move to the smaller scale that is in Thailand. It also have experienced some water-related disasters. Every year in Thailand, drought has damaged its agricultural area. And similarly, the flood events have been affecting Thailand, and Thailand is experiencing a lot of economic loss. And the most noticeable one is in 2011, which is a very huge flood. So this confirms that climate change is happening and it has impacts, but how the changes and impacts are different between developing and developed world. I here try to show you some differences so that you can visualize the situation in these two different contexts. So let's see, in this study area that I will be talking about in this presentation, the main source of livelihood of people is agriculture, and they are doing subsistence agriculture. I'll be comparing this with the general case in Nebraska, where Nebraska have a lot of commercial, very huge, large-scale agriculture. And besides agriculture, they have some other income sources. But while in Thailand, in this particular area, in the village, they do not have strong other income sources. And farming is totally rain-fed and only have very little irrigation facilities. And here in Nebraska, they have forecasting system, very good. I have maybe every day or weekly based, very small or very useful informations for the farmers as well. But while in case of Thailand, they do not have those kind of informations for pre-preparation or proactive plans. And the effects there is mostly flood, drought, and landslides. Here also in Nebraska, they have some flood impacts. Preparedness in that developing country context in that specific village is very poor. They do not have any preparations, and they just wait and see if the rain doesn't happen, they cannot do anything. While in here, they have preparations for hybrid varieties, deficit irrigation techniques, and do some good preparation for crop switching and managing land. And while for adaptation and mitigation to drought in developing contexts, it's very poor. There is no crop insurance at all if there is a crop failure. And what they do is just do some changes in crop calendar. But in here, they have crop insurance and also have some other mitigation measures. And also we have here in Nebraska, the drought research center and all water center and all. So when comparing with the developed and developing world, it seems that the sensitivity to climate change is very high in developing countries where they have very less preparations and have no idea about what to do. But it's very totally different in here, where there is access to information, technology, and all other stuffs. So this is basically what's the difference. And this shows that research on climate change in developing countries is very crucial. So now I want to move to my main topic today. So it's important to look for climate change impacts, study about climate change in developing countries. So that's why I chose this area. I wanted to do a study in Thailand. So there has been a lot of studies being done, and we all are somehow working on climate change. I see most of the faces who are here working on climate change. And the context in developing country and developed country is very different. Let's consider the case of Japan, where they have very high quality data and real-time measurements Like they have developed these automated meteorological data acquisition system which records like data every 10 minutes. But in case of Thailand or in Nepal or Sri Lanka, in maybe some places in India and other many countries, maybe in Africa, the context is very different. Like we have very less number of hydrometeorological stations and the data quality is very poor. And sometimes even though we get data, like there are a lot of data gaps, like for years and years, and like so much of error, which it's really difficult to rely only on data sometimes. And sometimes like even there is some station, it is like very sparsely distributed. And for the local scale study, we do not have any information or like any data related to climate parameters. So in that case, how to deal with this situation? So there can be an alternative, and local people who are living in that specific area or the very small area can be an instrumental data. They can be a source of data in understanding climate change. Their information reflects local concerns, how climate change impacts on their lives, like what are their livelihood and their dependent, how they are dependent on local factors. So this will help us to do some adaptation planning, to make some mitigation plans. So studying or digging into sometimes people's perception at the lower scale is very important. And I couldn't find much studies being done in Thailand relating to like local perception. There are very few. And in this area, in the mountainous area, I didn't find any. So I thought like it will be interesting to investigate, and I'm doing this local people's perception of climate change and its impact in one of the villages in mountainous Mecham River Basin in northern Thailand. So this is the location of the study area in Thailand. It's in the northern part of Thailand. It's the mountainous area. You may be wondering, Thailand is a tropical country, have like many flatlands, and it's close to the beaches. But yeah, it also has some mountainous area in its northern parts. So I'm interested in this particular small village because this has experienced a lot of, many times, drought, flood, and landslides. So I thought this will be an interesting place to check about the people's perception of those events and climate change. So the climate in this area is monsoonal. Agriculture is their main source of livelihood, and they grow rice in lower areas where they have a little bit of irrigation facilities, and in upper areas where there is no irrigation facilities and it's rain-fed, they grow some corn. And they have 227 households, and like household monthly income is very less, like 150 US dollars. And education basic level they have is, in general, is like elementary school only. And a lot of houses have loans from agricultural banks. This is the general situation in that village. So my study will be based on this methodology, which integrates like social as well as physical aspects. And here I will be dealing just or showing just a small part in this presentation. For further detail, the methodology will be as this. Will be the primary as well as secondary data will be collected. For the perception, household and individual perception and socioeconomic data will be collected. And for the climate change part, physical or hydrometeorological data will be collected. For the social part, for the perception part, like I conducted some questionnaire survey, stakeholder workshops, also used some participatory ruler appraisal techniques. I did one focal group discussion and also did some field observation with the local people and like government officers. And for the hydrometeorological station, quite close to this village has one station. So I collected data from there, and luckily I was able to use 30 years data collected at that station. And for the data analysis, I did, besides some simple statistics. I use some empirical model as like multinomial logistic regression and use like non-parametric tests like features exact test. And for the climate data analysis, I did some yearly and seasonal trend analysis, like including like long-term annual rainfall, accumulated monthly rainfall, and number of rainy days, like just to check the trends and how it's going. Sometimes people say that how can we believe people's perception? Like it is just their observation and they may not correctly remember it. So validating it with the observed data is very important. So this methodology not just collects the perception or the social data, it tries to validate it with some available physical data and figures. So I would like to move to the results and discussion of this study. So it's found that more than 90% of people in this village have perceived climate change. In their definition or understanding, climate change is the changes in the regular climate pattern or the parameters which is very important for them. For example, they are mostly they are mostly farmers, so they do not have irrigation facilities and have to depend on uh, natural rain. So if there is no rain or if there is any changes, that means to them is climate change. So, and most of them have personally experienced those changes because they have been into farming since they are born. They have been, family is farming family, so they are quite used to since their childhood about the farming, and they are into farming. And some also comprehended climate change from various sources because the influence of media and other people, their neighbors, and other uh, developing organizations, staffs, like extension officers, they also have learned from them. Here it seems that the influence of media is quite high. This information can be captured for climate change mitigation and adaptation. As the influence of media is high, when we have to implement some adaptation or mitigation plans, we can share the information or use this media as a source to spread some information to them. So I try to check if there is any variation with some household variables like their understanding of climate change perception with like gender, like is there any differences with the age, like old people are perceiving a lot of more changes than the young people if young people have not perceived changes, or how is the difference between education, their income source, years of experience in farming, irrigation facility and all. But I couldn't find much differences in gender, in age, in education, income source, and also like years of farming and irrigation facility. It might be because they all are involved in agriculture and are doing like rain-fed agriculture and are closely experiencing the weather changes and changes in climate. So most of them have perceived the changes. And I thought that there should be changes in the perception between the people who have long years of experience than less years of experience, but to my surprise, it didn't happen so. I will go more about this in the next slide. And for the climate-related variables like their experience or the perception on changes in rainfall timing is quite significant. They also have experienced changes in amount of rainfall, but it didn't show any significant trends. So here I tried to validate the people's perception about the changes in climate in the recent years. They says that they perceive that the changes happen in recent 2 decades. So this data shows that significant changes in last 15 to 20 years in the annual rainfall. The radical change happened here in 1993, and Then onwards, it shows some increasing trend in last 18 years. But in these few years, I couldn't use the data because it has so much of data gap. But still, I use this available physical data to validate their perception. So how about the changes they perceived in rainfall timing? The timely rain, the regular rainfall is like it starts or begins in mid-April. But people have experienced or perceived changes in rainfall timing, and they shared that the rain has arrived just in mid-May or mid-June, while the normal schedule for the starting of rainfall is mid-April. And similarly for the changes in amount of rainfall, like they have noticed changes in last 2 decades, and most of them have experienced an increase in amount of rainfall. So when validating this with the available data, I found that their perception of changes in rainfall timing is very strictly driven by the changes in rainfall in 2010 and 2011. In 2010, it started quite late in mid-May, and in 2011, it started raining only in June, which is very late, and it affected their plantation, paddy plantation and all. So that has greater effect on their perception about the rainfall timing. However, for the amount of rainfall, their perception as well as data is quite matching, and it shows that the um, higher accumulated monthly rainfall in years 2000, 2000 and 2002 to 2011, which is quite matching with their experience in increasing rainfall in last 2 decades. So this also validates that they are the observers in the field. They can be the source of information about the changes which is taking place. So I already mentioned that 87% of households are doing agriculture or are like agriculture-based households. So among them, like 77% have loans from local banks or agriculture banks. And when looking for the irrigation facilities, very limited households, 16% have irrigation facilities, and rest 59% doesn't have any irrigation facilities and just depends on rainfall. So here I want to highlight is, if there is no rainfall, then certainly there will be decrease in production, and maybe like the production may be like totally or partially lost. That means their income will be reduced, and they will have difficulties in paying loans, and maybe they might have to take some more loans. So this says that climate change matters them a great deal, and it's a very important issue for them. So now I want to move to the impacts, their perception of climate change impacts. Exposure to changes in climate and extreme events is one of the non-trivial source of information which has helped them to shape their perceptions about climate change impacts, especially like flood, drought, and landslide events. So how do they understand drought? What is drought to them? They define that drought is a period with less or late or no rain. They takes like drying up of rivers and like decreasing level of water in the reservoir as an indicator for their understanding. So it's found that normal dry season in this area is November to April. But there is the increase in severity of dryness. The drought situation here in Thailand, in this area, is very different from the drought which is in India or Africa. They have like very long extended period that may be like months and months or years. But here the drought, from my observation and understanding, is just the shift in rainfall for like 2 or 3 months, that affected them a lot in their farming. But for the drinking water and all, they still have groundwater supplies, though the level of groundwater is quite low because of like less rain, but they still have water supplies. And severity of drought is very different, or maybe when compared with those regions in India or Africa, it's quite less. In here, the drought is increase in severity of dryness for those months when the rain doesn't come at the correct time or when it is expected. So the problem for them is they do not have reservoirs to store water during rainy season. This has affected their perception, and they feel that they perceive that the drought events is increasing and its impact is increasing. And if they have some water storage, then they might feel that the drought can be mitigated, and their perception may be quite different if in case they have some water facilities. And the drought events they have experienced is in 1997, 2002, 9, 10, and 11. So it's found that the perception of changes in number of rainy days and late rainfall is found to be significantly affecting the choice of increasing frequency of drought. Those who have experienced or like perceiving changes in number of rainy days are found to be perceiving like increasing frequency of drought. And the data also shows that the number of rainy days is decreasing since like 1982 to 2012. And also like the, as I mentioned earlier, their perception of this rainfall changes in like rainfall timing is mainly influenced by the recent very extreme drought in 2010 and 11. So another effects of climate change in this area is flood. Their local understanding of flood is like its presence of too much water in the surrounding area, and have experienced some flood events in 2002, 3, 4, 5, and 11. They understand that they perceive that the causes of flood is mainly due to like heavy rain and poor drainage, and have perceived only 30% have perceived increasing trend in flood, and 70% has not observed any trends. This is possibly because only certain households are living in lower areas, and most of them are in the hills. Respondents perceiving like heavy rainfall have perceived increasing trend in flood. This Fisher's exact test confirms that like those perceiving heavy rainfall have perceived increasing trend in flood. Heavy rainfall here means like intensity, but due to the lack of data, I cannot validate it with like intensity of rainfall data. But when checking the annual rainfall, it shows some increasing trend. And also for the total rainfall during the rainy months, August, September, and October, it is showing the increasing trend, which is quite similar with the perception of locals that the flood events is increasing. So local people's perception of flood cause is like heavy rain in headwaters, which will increase the water level in the downstream, and its backflow causes flood. That is what they understood how the flood occurs. Like here, this one is called the Mecham River, is the main river, and this is one of the tributary that is flowing through the village that is called Merak River. And one of the plus point of this kind of small scale study is that we can visualize the situation, or we can observe what is going there in the local area, which may not be possible when we do like long or like larger scale studies. So here we can see like what is actually the cause of flood, which is different than the people's perception of flood causes. The heavy rainfall in the upper area like causes the water level rise in the rivers downstream somewhere here, and the block is like the stream is so narrow down. I cannot show it here, but it's quite a little bit far away. Has the narrow neck, so it causes the backflow and flooding in the area. But this is not the only cause, but this is the only cause they have understood. The other cause is like the landslide. This area is very prone to landslide, and landslide causes like debris loading in the rivers and uncontrolled blockage of rivers and streams, which also cause flash flood. So it shows that this kind of study is important, like which gives idea about what is the situation, and if they blindly do some adaptations based on the understanding that it's the backflow, then the mitigation measure and the adaptation measure may not be successful. So landslide mitigation as well as like flood mitigation and adaptation should go together. So about the landslide, like not many people have experienced landslide, not, and it's like the people who have perceived heavy rainfall says that it's the major cause of landslide. And like major landslide experiences they have is in 2002, 3, and 4. And most disastrous one is in 2002, which destroyed like 60 households in the area. And they are saying that the landslide is not increasing, landslide occurrence is like quite decreasing. This might be because they haven't experienced big landslide after 2002-1, so they believe that the landslide occurrence is decreasing. But however, the data or their experiences of increasing in annual rainfall or like rainfall pattern shows that there is chances of increase in landslide in future. So about the impacts, they have experienced different impacts, such as like for the drought, like drying of water resources, declining of groundwater level, reduction in optimum crop growing period, which is mainly due to the shift in the rainfall timing, and just a partial crop loss, and in severe dry years, quite a huge crop loss. And for the flood impacts, flood has affected like partial crop loss and have irrigation canal collapse in some areas, and also induced like soil erosion because this area has sandy soil, and they have difficulties in groundwater collection when it is totally flooded, and also have some assets loss and reduction in household income. And for the landslide impacts, they have like assets loss and destruction and blockage of road and destruction and blockage of irrigation canals. So I didn't show much about the impacts and just try to list out what are the impacts in that area. So from this study, I conclude that perception of climate change and impacts substantially modified by local conditions. It varies from one situation to another situation. So this study gives insights about the climate change and its impacts in this particular small area. And it is a baseline information for the development of effective climate change adaptation and mitigation policies. The study shows that the people's perception is quite similar with the data or the changes which is taking place. So they have a good knowledge and understanding of changes in their periphery or in their village. It also shows that the changes in climate can increase even in short term. From the perception, we found that it has increased dramatically in the last 20 years. So it highlights that it is important to develop robust and resilient policies, and which is needed today. So for their perception, media has played very important role. So ensuring access to information is strongly recommended, which will raise awareness on like climate change impacts and about the possible mitigation and adaptation measures. And for the one of the important mitigation or adaptation, investment in construction of reservoirs will be very highly influential to help them to cope with the drought problems. And lack of awareness on causes of flood and flood and adaptation efforts, their adaptation efforts cannot lead to effective results without considering landslide mitigation measures, because their understanding of causes of flood is only due to the backflow of river, but there is also the influence of landslides. So we have to help them, or we have to teach them to take some mitigation measures focusing both on landslide and flood. So this is just a small part of the study, and we still have to follow up this, and we are doing is on the we are studying. We still haven't finished the downscaling parts and all other adaptation assessments. So hopefully I can share with you all those results through some publications in future. So thank you all for attending this program or this presentation. Thanks a lot.
So, any question?
Thank you for the nice presentation. I have one minor correction, and you put the table in the developing and
Okay. Let me move
in
to that one.
You put weather forecasting.
Yeah, this
there,
one, right?
Yeah, it is right. Yeah, it's covered by the that's
Yep.
there. Weather forecasting and High Plain Regional Climate Center and the National Drought Mitigation Center do not give weather forecasting. We
Okay.
give climate information and drought monitoring. And so probably you can add on that Climate Prediction Center or National Weather Service for
Okay.
the weather forecasting.
Thank you for the correction. Actually, I got information for someone else, so I
Okay.
was not confirmed. Okay,
So
thank you very much.
my question now is when you see the drought frequency in the last few years, and then the perception is, oh, drought is frequent, they would think. For example, the landslide you mentioned in 2002, and so they thought, no, that's not frequent.
Yes.
So how do you compare that with the actual facts?
Yes. But actual facts shows that even though they haven't experienced landslide after 2002, the data or the precipitation pattern shows that the annual rainfall is increasing. And also, like during the rainy season, it shows like sharp increase in like last many years. So even though their understanding is like it may not happen in near future, but we have to tell them, or like we have to advise them that it is possible. And based on that, they should take some mitigation or like adaptation measures. But in that area, they do not have any, even do not have like hazard map for landslide. And any place where they are living may be like sensitive to landslide disaster.
More questions?
Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned that gender did not play a role in a difference in perceptions, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I found that interesting.
Mm.
I might have expected gender to play more of a role. And it's interesting, too, that the variables you looked at.
Let me go to that one, maybe easier. Yeah, this one,
Yeah,
right?
this one. Yeah, so I wanted to look at the gender. roles again. So, a little higher for female versus male, but not statistical is
Yeah.
what you have there. Okay. And it's interesting, those variables are variables that we would use in the United States, for example, or researchers have used in the United States to look at vulnerability.
Okay.
So there's a researcher, for example, in South Carolina, Susan Cutter, and she maps vulnerability, and she uses many of these very same variables. So it's kind of interesting that the variables you are highlighting are similar variables to how we map natural hazard vulnerability in the United States. So I was just finding that very interesting.
Thank you.
More questions?
Thanks. Very interesting presentation. I was wondering, did you observe or did you ask any questions about other changes that were happening in the area? Were there, for example, big population changes over the last 10 years or big changes in technology or in the kinds of crops? And to what extent were the perceived changes in climate change part of a larger process of change that was occurring there? Did you get any insights into that?
Yeah, I checked that as well. I checked the changes in population in this area, but I didn't bring the slide here, but I have here in paper. Maybe I will share with you later. I found that the population is quite growing, and if the population grows and if the water problem, like in the dry season, they do not have enough water, and if that persists, then there might be problem for water availability for their daily use. And another thing is youngsters, they are slowly moving to the cities for other alternative jobs. So maybe in future, like if that trend continues, there might be some labor shortage in that area. So those are the things I have found. And for the technology, there is not that distinct changes or they haven't shared any specific. But for the crop varieties, they are trying to switch some varieties that is given by some agriculture officers, but they still are not sure like if that variety is okay or not, and they are reluctant to accept those varieties. So that is what I found there.
Yeah, so to follow on Roberto's question,
Yeah.
how many of these local people have cell phone technology and use cell phones in their operation?
Yeah, they have cell phones. Most of the people have in Thailand, yes.
And they use these cell phones. Would that be a way for them to communicate, say, with Bangkok and official agencies, say, in Bangkok?
They said that when there was a landslide, huge landslide before, one of the village head got information via phone that there may be possibility of landslide. So they just got out from the house and no one was dead. Like I mean like there was no casualties, but all their houses have been spoiled. But at the moment, I don't think like they get some information because they didn't say that they are getting like pre-information about the possibilities of like late rainfall or anything. They didn't share about that. Okay.
So I have also one question. How
Sure.
much these local perception
Mm.
affect the policy decisions at the provincial level or the national level? Because this is again public pressure
Yeah.
on the government. So how much what they perceive versus what is actually found?
Mm.
How much difference you find? Means the government policies, are they more affected by the perception of these people, or it's pretty much done at the provincial or a national scale?
Uh, Based on my experience in Thai as well as in Nepal and Sri Lanka, I found that those perception related information that is influential formulating some plans in the very local or like district level or provincial level, but still it is not considered much by the higher or like higher government level. They are making some plans which is not suiting, or like they are making plans which is not considering the local situation. So sometimes there is a gap, but definitely the local people, they are recommending, the local government officers are recommending based on their observation in that area and considering their perceptions.
Any more questions? Okay, if not, thank you very much
Okay.
for a nice presentation.
Thank you very much.